best way forward.
Nasty as hell, screaming at everything else.
Let's get rid of this sideshow because the main event is my campaign for sheriff. When I win, I will chase drug war criminals with a vengeance. Most of them are here in D.C., stalking the halls of Congress. They've wasted $1 trillion and decimated 3 generations of black Americans. They're drug war criminals. If you're one of them, watch out. If you come to my town, I will hunt you down and ship you to The Hague, where they have a special court for scum like you. I'm Rick Stewart, and I approve this message.
Lynn County, Iowa resident Rick Stewart is running for the position of sheriff under a campaign to end the disastrous war on drugs and change the way policing is done. And I recently spoke to him in length about it. There is always a contingent of cop block critics who challenge us to become cops and change the system from within. I have outright denied the feasibility of this method on numerous occasions. A few weeks ago, when I heard about Stewart's campaign for sheriff in an adjacent county to where I live via the above video, I reached out for an interview, primed with the same skepticism as before. Rick was kind enough to invite me to meet in his home a few nights later. I offered to prepare a list of questions so he could think on his responses beforehand, but his reply to the offer was another clue to his charisma and character. I don't want questions ahead of time for a very simple reason. Every interview, or every voter I talk to, is a test. If I want to do well on the test, I need to prepare for every question that could possibly be asked. This puts a lot of pressure on me, self-imposed, and I push myself harder. At first you might think that much of what Rick says sounds either too simple, or too difficult, to practically achieve. Which was also my starting prognosis. But what seemed practically impossible on its own becomes easily imagined under the force of his personality. It is because he has the qualities of a leader, and not the mindless herder mentality of bureaucrats and administrators shared by so many of our pompous elected officials, that makes his ideas seem practically applicable. His enthusiasm, passion and genuine interest in other people's ideas and lives give him a unique ability to reach people in his community at the most fundamental level and create a vibrant example for the rest of the world. Are you a Leo? Click the banner above. Are you a Leo? Click the banner above. I pulled up to his house as scheduled. It was easy to tell it was his house, because the Johnson/Weld and Libertarian Party signs were all but blocking the entrance. Rick is a libertarian, and aside from being a Gary Johnson supporter in the last 2 elections, he also led a campaign in Washington, D.C. to get third-party candidates into the presidential debates. From this experience he learned a lot of the skills he needed to run his own campaign, budgeted strictly on almost entirely his own dime. Through the glass door, as I knocked, I could see Rick reading on the couch and hear the Willie Nelson playing in his home. In a Johnson/Weld t-shirt and jeans held up with a Grateful Dead belt, he greeted me and invited me in, and we jumped right into a conversation that lasted over 4 hours. A half hour and I set up cameras while he told me stories about some of the officer misdeeds he witnessed during his own time as a police officer in the early 70s. That is where the following 2-hour video begins. I had planned to cut the video down into smaller segments. However, no matter what approach I explored, there was no way to distill it all down into a shorter length video without losing the larger points. So instead I will discuss some of the larger points here, and if you are interested, you will definitely want to take the time to watch the full discussion. After finishing college and living the hippie lifestyle, Rick settled down and became a police officer at the age of 21. The job required taking the Iowa Civil Service entrance exams, on which Rick scored higher than anyone in the state had before, which led the University of Iowa test administrator to recommend he not be hired as an officer. The chief, who Rick thought highly of, ignored that and hired him anyway. This was in 1971, at the dawn of the drug war. However, Rick says it had not yet begun to really affect how he or his department operated. In fact, he had initially admitted to the chief that he had used marijuana, which did not cause any concern whatsoever. In contrast to his experience at that time, He has gained a huge perspective on how the war on drugs changed everything. After 2 years working as a police officer without any real issues, a new mayor was elected who told that chief that Rick must shave his short, well-trimmed beard or resign. "That's not how I work," Rick responded when the chief presented the mayor's ultimatum. "I know," said the chief. And so that was the end of that. Soon after he became interested in communalism, beginning with the simple idea that it would be more efficient for families to share appliances and other resources on a small scale. This experiment grew much faster than he had anticipated and quickly grew into the product family known as Frontier Natural Products, which he acted as CEO of for nearly 20 years before retiring 21 years ago. It is interesting to note that the incumbent Linn County Sheriff has accused Rick of not having the experience to run an operation the size of that department, since FNP was 1.5 times the size of the department. Rick not only has the better experience, but in his role he acted a leader, not just as another name in an endless succession of administrators as represented by the Democrat in office. When he retired at the age of 48 he went to France and learned to speak French, to Spain to learn Spanish and then study Chinese in Beijing. After that he returned to America and spent some time back in school, and hiked the entirety of the Appalachian Trail. He continues to travel the country and world absorbing knowledge and culture from diverse sources. From there he found himself in Guatemala, where he eventually got involved in a voluntary charity project that he continues to participate in, even maintaining a residence there. The charity leads tourists to observe volcanoes in exchange for donations, which are then used to maintain an orphanage for 35 kids and a private school serving 175 disadvantaged children. PayPal ads. 4 years ago he became interested in politics via the issues involving Gary Johnson and third-party candidates being restricted from the presidential debates. He took off to Washington and was couching surfing with a friend who worked as a professional Santa Claus. He fought a good fight and won some battles, but he didn't get the desired results. But he did learn. 2 years ago he ran for state senate as an independent. He did it on the smallest possible budget, self-funded with no donations taken. To campaign he visited every county in Iowa. He spoke to 200 newspapers, which is basically all of them, he says. Although he did not win, he did come in third of 6, with more votes than any independent candidate in state history. And again, he learned a lot. For instance, he learned that the position of sheriff is the highest law enforcement official in the county. And of the 99 counties, the one he lived in is the second most populous. This he saw as the perfect place to get inside the system. Not only could he affect what he saw as the most dangerous issue in America, the war on drugs, but he could gain some political power to voice to some of his ideas on a local, state and national level. He looked Arizona's Sheriff Joe Arpaio and decided to become the reasonable opposition to that sort of ideology. He would use the position not to strengthen his own department and position, but to strengthen his community, and then broadcast the ideas and their results to the rest of the country. So to lay groundwork for that and kick off his campaign, he created 5 commercials that he ran 30 times apiece in Washington, D.C. during the times and channels his research told him that politicians would be most likely to be watching. His message is stark and clear. The drug war is a massive failure that has cost taxpayers, ruined lives and destroyed 3 generations of young black men and their communities. And the politicians supporting the war on drugs are war criminals. We discussed other problems with the drug war during which he talks about its massive failure institutionally and morally. He calls it a 50-year losing war that has done more damage than any other conflict in American history. Its cost, in dollars, lives and opportunities lost is immeasurable, he claims. Bans are an infinite tax. Rick discusses the parallels to the failed alcohol prohibition laws that caused more problems than they solved. He references the massive success Portugal has had in reducing drug use, overdose and social costs through their decriminalization. There is discussion about how U.S. drug policy and its effect on the international community have led to methamphetamine production in North Korea that funds nuclear weapons, or how it has led to opium trade practices in the Middle East that have created and funded extremist groups like the Taliban. However, its most damaging effect, he says, has been how it has changed the face of policing. From Mayberry to stormtroopers. And while I disagree that the Mayberry stereotype was ever the truth of policing, as an idea it is at least more charitable than what we have. Which is, at the very least, what Rick wants to achieve. He wants cops to be Andy Griffith types. Someone who knows everyone, someone who knows what's going on, and someone who solves problems. Instead, the drug war has become a tool for making arrests. It rewards and incentives police operating as agents who merely make arrests. And drugs give an easy reason to force interactions which may, rightfully or wrongfully, lead to those arrests. With the arrest-based policing came militarization and the formation of the SWAT team. The effects of this were that police became instruments of escalation, and by using the show of force to make compulsive arrests, eroded trust between themselves and their communities. With at least 10% of people using drugs, and with those people being
Just was one of those guys, you know, that pulled over women that he wanted to fuck.
Yeah, I've seen him.
And then this. It's like every day.
Did he have a permission or was it a rape thing?
Well, I wasn't ever there. But a guy that I had personally recruited to the police department because he was my friend and who'd said no, and then the chief told me to go get him back because we really needed him because the other people were horrible. And I did. I went back. I talked him into becoming a policeman. He was this guy's partner, you know. And he told me everything, but he never turned him in.
That's where we end up coming up with one of the reasons we say all cops are bad, and it's because regardless of if Officer, Smith might be a great guy and never actually done anything negative himself, as long as there are those other cops out there that are doing those things and they're not saying anything, they're not fighting it, then they're part of the problem.
They are part of the problem.
So
in some sense, they are the real problem.
They make it possible.
Because, in a company, that's my biggest experience, right, is a company that had 300 people when I left. But in a company, people will tell you how well other people are doing. Now, not everybody will, but believe me, everybody does. And that's the difference. And you go, what? That can't be true. And they go, hey, you didn't hear it from me, right? But you get it from somebody else, and it's like very quickly you discover, Joe's a bum. He's a bum this way, this way, this way. But the reason that you found out Joe was a bum is because people told you. Now, that might not happen in a union environment. I don't know anything about any place I haven't been. But I know in a company of 300 that they told me everything right away. The real question was, they told I don't know, maybe they told the HR director, let's just make up an example. And then the HR director would come and say, okay, here's some stuff you got to know, but I'm not going to tell you who told me. That's fine. Because if I make you tell you who told me, you'll never tell me again, will you?
Yeah.
I don't care. Just tell me what's going on. I'm all ears, and I'm not, if it has to be dealt with, then we're all in it together. But with the police department, it really isn't that way. There is a mentality of protect your own. Once you've been in, you're in for life. Now, you can get yourself thrown out and hated. I'm willing to bet that even those guys don't feel like they're out of it, because it's a fraternity. Sorry, you took the pledge. You got hazed. You're in. You're a brother. Yeah, I found it very, I like it, but not to protect people that shouldn't be brothers. You know what I mean? It's like you can't have it both ways. You can't have a fraternity of strength that is marred by members that shouldn't be there, that are the contrary of what you're trying to do. But I can tell you that just in my short experience of time, they always talked about, I can't even use the guy's name on video. But they talked about, let's just call him Joe, right? The year that Joe stole Christmas. And And they laughed about it, right? And Joe, you know, cops check doors to see if they're locked. And when they're unlocked, you call up the owner of the business and you say, hey, your back door is unlocked. What do you want me to do? And 1 year, Granda found there was this place that was frequently unlocked. You know, it's funny, but businessmen sometimes don't lock their back doors. And some of them are the worst. And, you know, he just went in and helped himself to stuff for Christmas for everybody before he called the guy up. You know, it was in the trunk of the car. And, you know, the people laughed about it. That happened before I was there, but it's like, what are you supposed to do? I mean, yeah, you laugh about it. But, and then the other one was, there was a guy who was a close friend of a cop. And he drove out into the country and stole a bunch of 5-gallon buckets of herbicide or pesticide or something that cost a lot of money and came in 5-gallon buckets. And everybody knew it. All the cops knew it. They heard him on the scanners.
But the blue code of silence.
Never made it to him, you know? They just kept shutting.
Yeah.
And what are some of the other egregious ones? Oh yeah, the guy you know, I was a cop, there was a deputy. The alarm went off in a coin changing machine, a laundromat. I was the only one on duty. I went over and here's these 3 guys with the Illinois plates, right? Standing at the coin machine. And I'm like, hey guys, what's up? And they're like, nothing, just trying to get change for $1. You know, this fucking machine is broke, you know. I said, yeah, really? I said, why don't you empty your pockets? Well, they had, I don't know, I can't remember some of the details. They had hundreds of dollars worth of coins on them, right? But this particular coin machine had they'd not gotten any out of it, right? They were obviously on a hit, those laundromats at night. They were drive from Chicago, and they just hadn't got any out of this one yet. But they got it out of somewhere, and all we need to do is find out where, and then just turn them over, right? And so, you know, at night when there's 3 guys, Illinois plates, and you're a single, like, policeman, you need to think carefully, right? Your antenna are on full gear. So I got a deputy and came on down from somewhere out of town just to, you know, make sure there were 2 of us and not just me on this. I didn't have any basis for arrest or anything. Well, he took him in, right? We took him in, but we took him to the jail, right? And these guys have not been charged. They're clearly guilty, but we don't know of what. we do know of what. It's ripping off laundromats. We just don't know which one. You know, we've got everything except the victim. And it was ridiculous, though back in those days, you know, today you could probably find out where the laundromats had been ripped off pretty easily, but back in those days it's a different state and there's no internet and, you know, you good luck, okay? And so anyway, our strategy was, you know, you hold them for a day and see if you find out anything. And, but this guy, the deputy, right, he was just a bully. And there were sort of 2 younger ones and an older one. There was a leader of the gang, right? They were young, they weren't kids. I mean, he was an adult, but they were probably all adults, but he was clearly the leader. And the deputy, you know, used all of his wisdom to try and get him to admit where he got all of his hundreds of dollars worth of coins and stuff. And, you know, the guy was street hardened. He knew he wasn't going to tell anything. And this is in the jail. Right? So the deputy started throwing him up against the wall and banging his head against the wall with this, you know, like this, right? And I have to stand there and watch it. And I wasn't, you know, I didn't have the authority to say stop, really. You know, the deputy had been on the job a lot more than I'd been. It's clearly, like, just unthinkable that you try and beat the guy's brains out. And I tell you what, you know, after that situation, I left. I admired the guy that got his head beat up tremendously. Because he's the one that won, you know, he never said anything. He just said, you know, hey, go ahead, beat me. I mean, at the end of the day, you left him in jail for the night, and the next morning there was nothing, and hey, okay, here you go, you're on the road again. So that's the kind of thing that happens. You know, you can imagine if you were in a private business and one of your coworkers behaved that way. You might tolerate it because of psychological pressure at the time, but you would talk. I mean, there's no doubt about it, you would go and tell people. Because you know that it's wrong, and you just want to find a good way to save your own ass and make, you know, like, this is not my issue, but I'm not going to let it go without being reported. Now, maybe there are a lot of private businesses that don't do that, and I expect there are. But it's just a different world. It's the mentality of cops versus the mentality of regular people. You know? And at the same time, there was a lot of great cops, you know. There's a lot of great cops. Like you said, if you're letting the bad ones survive in the business, you're part of the problem.
Well, hey, this is Rick Stewart, Josh from COPBLOCK. Rick has been generous enough to invite me to his home to have a discussion with him. He is running for sheriff here, and is it Marion County?
Nope, it's Lynn County.
Lynn County.
Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which includes Marion, Hiawatha, Robbins, but it's Lynn County, L-I-N-N.
Lynn County, Iowa. What's so different and revolutionary about what Rick is trying to do is he's doing what many of you have asked of us to do lots of times, to change the system from the inside. That's exactly what he hopes to do. He is looking at the drug war specifically and what a problem it's become and how it's ruins lives and degrades communities and whatnot. And he plans to use his position as sheriff to change that issue. So I will let him just tell us a little bit more about what your plan is, what your goals are, and how you came to this place.
Sure. My first career was law enforcement. I started when I was 21 and spent 2 years, and then it was prematurely interrupted when a 72-year-old mayor of the town, brand new mayor, decided that he could tell me to shave my beard off. I'd had the beard before the mayor came into office, and I shaved it off of my own accord, and then he came into office. I guess I wasn't paying attention. I started growing it back again. He told the chief, get him to shave the beard or you lose your chief's job. The chief said, Rick, get rid of your beard or you're gone. I'm like, oh no, that's not the way I work. I'm gone. And the chief said, I know, but I'm not, that's the way it's going to work. So I got fired, that's fine, moved on. Had a career in private industry. I started a company as a cooperative. I was a communalist, I think is what I would call myself. And I just thought we were starting a little thing so that 4 or 5 families could all raise our children together and not have to buy 4 or 5 washing machines. But one's probably enough. And it turned out that the communalist stuff didn't really work as well, and in some sense the business grew too fast because suddenly we had to just hire people. We couldn't find people to join us as communalists. Eventually the business did fairly well. When I left, it had 300 people and $40 million in sales. Today it's still doing well. It's a $180 million business. It's in the natural food business. Frontier Natural Products, in case you want some herbs and spices, buy ours. But I retired early at 48 and a half because I had many other things I wanted to do, which I couldn't do if I was working every day. So I studied French in Paris, and I studied Spanish in Spain and Chinese in Beijing, and I hiked the Appalachian Trail start to finish, and I went back to junior college and retook my calculus sequence because it was so much fun the first time. And I just have had a lot of fun, and I've also been working for 10 years now at a Guatemalan charity that takes tourists up volcanoes and back down again, and then we take that income and support an orphanage for 35 kids and a private school for 175 kids, K through 6. And we provide actually 110% of their operating budget.
Wow.
They don't spend everything we earn for them every year. That doesn't mean they don't want your donations. Yeah, it's a very successful organization. It's 100% volunteer. All the guys are volunteers, they always have been. There's probably been 350 of them now, because you only usually come for 3 months and then you disappear. So I've been working for that organization, and I maintain an apartment down in Guatemala. But 4 years ago, in 2012, I really, politics just wasn't my thing. I felt my outrage, but it felt like it was too hard to crack and not worth it and all that. But in 2012, I supported Gary Johnson as a Libertarian candidate for president, and it was clear that if he got into the presidential debates that it was going to be a discussion, and if he didn't get in, it wasn't. I didn't have to have anybody tutor me on that concept. If you get into the presidential debates, people are going to know who you are. If you don't, they aren't. So I started trying to get him into the presidential debates, and in the course of that work, the first thing I did was I just realized that they were troglodytes. They knew nothing but commission. I mean, they had a web page in the year 2012 that did not have a single contact us link. They didn't tell you their phone number, their address, an email address. They didn't have a form. It was nothing. And so I figured out who their directors were. I did a bunch of email stuff, and I started getting feedback. But I just packed up the car. I drove to Washington, D.C. I couch surfed with the guy who's a professional Santa Claus. And then a friend of mine's mother turned out to have a house there, and I lived in her house. And after 6 weeks, I had done everything I could think of to do. And I'd realized that the problem was a lot bigger than I thought. They weren't troglodytes. They were like an armed camp. They were well defended. So I didn't have anything left to do there. So I came back to Iowa, and then I very shortly discovered that that you could prove with their income tax returns that their national sponsors weren't sponsors. Well, with that, I got 3 of their national sponsors, there were only 10, to withdraw. I just presented them with the evidence. And they said, oh, we're out of here. You know, it was amazing. And that took 1 week. But unfortunately, we never got any more out, and so the debates went on, and the rest is history. But it got me. I realized the enemy is not as well fortified as I thought. They're in many ways very stupid. They're clever, but in many ways they're not tough. They're like, I can beat these guys. They can't cover their tracks. And number one, they're guilty. They're like a criminal. Okay, so criminals make mistakes. If you're on the right side of the law, it's easy to figure out, who's on the wrong side of the law, because they just make mistakes. That's what really happens. Okay, the number one mistake they make is they talk. But the Commission on Presidential Debates, that's a mistake they never make, is they don't talk. Anyway, I got interested in politics. 2 years ago, I ran for United States Senator from Iowa as an independent. And I intentionally took no donations, and I spent less than $5,000, which is the filing amount for the FEC. If you don't spend $5,000, you don't have to file. And I didn't want to waste time filing. I'm an accountant. I don't need to fill out more paperwork to prove something. So I rode my bicycle around all 99 Iowa counties, 3,000 miles. I did interviews with about 200 small-town newspapers, virtually every single small-town newspaper in Iowa, and the big ones too. But I learned a lot. I came in third, but I beat 3 other people who came in 4th, 5th, and 6th, including the dead libertarian, which is a tragedy. He died 3 weeks before the election. But I got more votes than any independent candidate in Iowa history, 26,000. And it got me thinking about how effective you can be in something. And sheriff's position has interested me because it's a very powerful position. A lot of people don't realize. The sheriff is the highest law enforcement official in a county. Well, that's a lot. That's not small change. The sheriff is bigger than the police department. And there's only 99 counties in Iowa, and this is the second largest. Lynn County is the second largest after Polk County, which is where Des Moines is. If you're the sheriff of Lynn County, you've got a bully pulpit that is huge. And I very carefully did something that I had been thinking about for 20 years, but I'd never done, and it crystallized. So I made 4 TV advertisements. And in September this year, every week that Congress was in session, you might not think about this too much, but Congress is not in session in August or October because in October they're on vacation, and in August they're on vacation, and in October they have to go home and campaign. So they have 1 month of in session. They go to work 1 month that quarter, and they don't go. It's a 5-day week, but not the kind of 5-day week you and I would have. They fly in on Monday, so there's nothing that happens until Monday night. Really, there's nothing that happens. And then they fly home on Friday, so there's nothing that happens on Friday after like 9 in the morning, so nothing happens. So Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, that's it, right? And they don't do anything. Even when they're used to have sort of a cooperative Congress, they didn't do anything. I think that's good sometimes. But Those 4 weeks, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I advertised on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, 30 times each. So 10 a day on CNN, 10 on Fox, 10 on MSNBC. And I had one commercial for the first week. I had a second, a third, and a fourth, a different commercial every week. You know, you get a chance to look at them. You should be able to figure out where they are. I don't need to tell you that. And they're pretty in your face. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you seen one?
I've seen at least 2 of them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I tried to make them all in your face.
Yeah.
You know, they're not an apology for my position. My position is that the drug war is the single most devastating thing that's ever happened to America, with the possible exception of the Civil War. And the only reason I say that is because I think the Civil War was a mistake, which made it a bad war. If it had been a good war, you might be able to forgive it, but I think it was a bad war. I don't think it did anything other than destroy the country, and we're still split over it. I mean, that doesn't seem like it worked out to me. How many million people killed? The drug war probably hasn't directly killed quite so many, but it's cost an enormous amount of money. Everybody knows that, okay? Everybody that's ever looked at the numbers knows we passed $1 trillion some time ago. And I think that's cheap counting, because that's not counting the other things that we've spent money on that nobody bothers to link. And I'll get to that in a minute. But you know, what else are you going to come up with that was worse? It's lasted for 50 years. It's a 50-year war. Remember when we used to study history, there was the 100-year war in Europe? And you just didn't believe it, right? I mean, that's not believable that they fought war for 100 years. No, it just glazes your eyes over. Well, this one's been 50. My children were born, we'd already had 15 years of the drug war. And now we've had 35 more. Really? In the amount of money that we've spent? That's just the expense and the length of the war. But then, as you mentioned, you guys don't need to know. You know all this stuff. I can skim. But the lives that have been lost, that have been ruined, the people that were thrown in jail for essentially nothing and left there for eternity, and their families that were left behind. And their brothers and their sisters, their mom and their dad and their wife or their husband and their children and their aunts and their uncles and their community, the neighbors, and so much is impacted negatively. The results they're just phenomenal. You cannot measure the cost of the drug war, I don't think. But in law enforcement, it's had a particularly pernicious effect. Now, remember, I started in law enforcement in 1971, okay? It must have been 72, but it was right in there. I know how old I was. I was 21. I was born in 1950. You do the math. That was almost exactly when Nixon started the drug war. He started it in 71, okay? But, you know, it's like he started it, but, you know, it wasn't that big of a deal. In my 2 years on the force of a town of 6,000, there was not one drug arrest made for 2 entire years. And I think part of that had to do with the fact that all the officers knew that I thought it was done. Before I was hired, my chief of police, it's a civil service job, so you take this written test. I'm pretty good at written tests, okay? These things are not tough. I can remember one of the questions. One package of cigarettes cost, it's multiple choice, one package of cigarettes cost 23 cents. How much do 2 packages cost? Multiple choice? I mean, you should just shoot anybody that can't get the answer, right? You're not qualified if you don't know the answer to that. So anyway, I scored well. In fact, I scored higher than anyone has ever scored on the civil service test in Iowa ever. And the University of Iowa professor who administered the test told my chief, don't hire him. He's too smart, he won't work out. And my chief was a good chief. He didn't listen. So during my interview, before he hired me, he said, have you ever smoked marijuana? Well, I really don't like to lie because it makes my heart hurt and I'm not good at it and I just don't want to do it. You know, I'd rather not say anything. But so I said, when I was in Nepal, where it's legal, I tried ganja. And he just jumped right up. If I was your age, I'd be smoking too, but I'm hooked on liquor. And that was the end of the conversation. That was it. You know, he felt he had to ask me. But he didn't. He didn't want to, and we never really talked about it ever since after that. But everybody knew that I'd smoked pot. I was a hippie. You know, I came home with a clean-shaven beard, but I was, one of those hippie troublemakers 2 years before. So that was you do the math, 72. Since then, what's happened is this division of police from I call them the Andy of Mayberry days, into the stormtrooper days. Because people laugh at Andy of Mayberry, but if you think about it seriously, those were the good old days in every way, right? That's what you really want from police work, is you want Andy, somebody that knows everybody in the town, somebody that understands what's going on, somebody that solves things without ruining people's lives. He made the town better, and that's what police work at its best used to do. And I believe that with numerous exceptions, that's the kind of police work that we tried to do. You know, I had good people working for me that trained me, the other patrol officers, every one of them is still a lifelong friend. And my chief, who just passed away a few years ago, he was a lifelong friend too, even though he had to fire me. You know, and that was, I put him through the ringer, and you know, I pissed his wife off more than I pissed him off, but that was juvenile and immature of me, and I know that. But nevertheless, we never broke our friendship. They were great. They were fantastic. Shift a little bit forward, and this drug war thing comes in, and you know, we probably don't have time to go through the entire history, but basically, the drug war made it was an exceptionally easy thing for law enforcement to use to arrest people. There's nothing easier than arresting people for drugs. You know, 90% of us don't get arrested for using drugs, but it's a reliable 10% that does. It's not the top of the chain usually. Okay, it's you know, you get into the top of the chain sometimes, and trust me, those guys probably are pretty smart. But that's not what you do, because if your job as a policeman is to arrest people for breaking the law, and you get rewarded for it, if that's your incentive, then that is slam dunk easy. You just go out and arrest the bottom 10% of the drug users. It's like giving people orders to arrest the people with the bottom 10% of IQs. You don't think that you can catch them? You can catch them with no problem whatsoever. And then, you know, sometimes you let them go, and sometimes you twist their arm and say, hey, tell me who your dealer was, and sometimes you make them turn them into an informant. I mean, there's all these things that I, fortunately, never was exposed to, because I got out long before that. But there's all these things that follow from the fact that there's a drug law. Not to mention corruption. There's nothing easier to corrupt than a guy who is getting paid a police officer's salary. I mean, you just peel off $100 bills until he says that's enough. I personally bribed a Chicago policeman one time to get out of a traffic ticket for $2. You don't think you can bribe a policeman? Think again. Because it's a discretionary thing. Now, I am not saying at any stretch of the imagination that every policeman can be bribed. No. What I'm saying is it's really easy to bribe a policeman. And it's really easy to find out which policemen take the money. It's no harder to find that out than it is to find out who's the dealer who's going to sell you your stuff. Everybody that wants stuff knows how to find a dealer, and everybody that wants to bribe a policeman knows how to find that guy who's going to take your money. That's the way it works. And that drug war just wormed its way in, and so then you not only have the bribery and the incredible discretion to just randomly arrest people because you wanted to look good, which is bad enough in and of itself. But what also happened in there is we had the development of the SWAT teams. Okay, SWAT teams were very new. The whole professionalization of the police force all across the country. I mean, it happened at different times in different places, but just as a simple example, I never even got to go to the police academy. The line was too long. It was relatively new when I started. There's only one in Iowa. The cities sometimes can have their own, but the one in Des Moines, it was relatively new, and you know, everybody had to do it, and so the waiting list was so long. 2 years later, I never even had to go, okay, which I think is probably good for me. But these police academies were designed mostly to professionalize and to fight corruption and, you know, to make police better. That's the desire. That's the intent. And, you know, in some ways they probably did, but it's hard to find those ways. But I want to say they probably did. But in many ways they did exactly the opposite, because they got into this I call it for shorthand just the whole militarization thing. Militarization is we're not Andy of Mayberry anymore. We're stormtroopers. We got helmets, we got bulletproof vests, we got knee pads, we got elbow pads, we got sticks, we got guns, we got a belt. We got a belt. You know, it looks like you know, you're an astronaut. Okay, I didn't think that we should be wearing the stuff we wore in 1972. You know, that gun was of absolutely no use to me on my belt when I'm talking to somebody in public. It's a separator. Okay? You don't think that the guy is looking at your gun and having a thought? You bet he's looking at your gun and having a thought. And it's not a thought like, my friend the cop with a gun. It's a thought like, oh, the cop with a gun. Now, there's a million people in the world that we have a million different ways of seeing things, but as a general rule, the whole officer, that show of force thing, that's an alienating tactic. That separates the person you're serving and protecting from you. And as soon as that's separated, as soon as that gulf opens up a little bit, what most people don't realize is that's the most important source for solving crime. Most crime is not solved with technology. Now, most crime is not solved with detective work. Most crime is solved because every criminal has friends who are not criminals and don't really think he should have done that. Especially when you get violence. You get like real violence, somebody that really did hurt you, not just hit you once and like you fell down and ran away, but like real violence. I mean, not that that's not violence, but the real kind of stuff where basically you need to go to the hospital, okay, or certainly rape or anything like that, right? Everybody that does those things has friends who don't do those things, and they don't necessarily think it's a good idea. So there's this circle of talk where the guy does something, and I don't care if he did it by himself. He tells one person or two people, and those two people are like, "Oh man, Andy, that was a bad idea," but then they tell somebody else, and pretty soon they're talking to you, the policeman. That's how crimes are solved. That's how they were solved 10,000 years ago, and that's how they're solved today. Except we no longer have that connection. Because most people don't know Andy. They don't know their sheriff, they don't know their sergeant, they don't know their officer, they don't know anybody. They see guys driving by in cars, they don't wave, because that's just attracting attention. The guy can arrest you if you don't have your seatbelt fastened. He can arrest you if you didn't have the tag on your car. Not arrest, you know what I mean. Maybe he can ruin your day. Yeah. And so 10% of everybody over the age of 18 smokes pot once a month in America. I know a lot of people that smoke pot will say, it's not 10, it's 35 or 40. Well, the best stats I've found are about 10, so that's the number I use. But so what? It's the 10% who are criminals. Well, they're not talking to the cops. I mean, when's the last time you called the cop up and said, hey, come on over for lunch, or let's have a coffee, or I've got something I'd like to talk to you about. It's not what we do, and the reason is we were alienated from them. And it really started with the drug war. It's not completely the drug war. You can blame individual people all along the way for basically doing the wrong thing. But law enforcement has been complicit in the drug war from the word go. Very few law enforcement officers have ever spoken up and said, this is a profoundly bad idea and it will not happen on my turf. Well, that's what I'm going to say. And that's what I'm saying right now. This is a profoundly bad idea and it will not happen on my turf. And I'm going to work really hard to make sure it doesn't happen on anybody else's turf either. Because it's not just a question of, I want to smoke my marijuana without getting arrested. A lot of people get that confused. It's not a legalized marijuana effort. When you think about something like drugs, there's two things. There's the good and the bad. There's a balance. They work really well for some people for whatever it is they want to do, and they don't work very well for other people who want to do something, and you get this mix, right? And you always have to look at it and say, well, on the balance, are we better off or worse off? You don't have to think about the balance on drugs. I don't care if there's no positive effect of drugs in the world. I mean, the obvious argument is, well, if there were no positive impact, why would 10% of Americans smoke pot every month? Because they hate themselves? No. I'm not making that argument. I'm not going to say, I really don't care what you do, but I'm not saying there's any good. I'm saying the bad from the drug war is so overwhelmingly bad that we don't even have to think about the good side. The bad is horrendous. So let's just go through, okay, so we started, everybody tends to think about, the personal experience. Let me say, the worst person, the least knowledgeable person to talk to about the drug war is somebody that uses drugs. They know literally nothing about themselves or their own drugs or the rest of the drugs in the world. They're happy, and they'll make arguments, and they think they know. They think they know everything about drugs because they've used drugs, and they're not like you've never used drugs, and they know nothing. And the reason they know nothing is because they haven't looked around other than their own circle of friends, for the most part. Obviously, there are many exceptions, but for the most part, most of the people who are active drug users really are almost their own worst enemies. I have a son who had a heroin habit, right? 7 days in the Mount Mercy Hospital for an overdose of methadone that he bought on the street when he was trying not to use heroin. So, so he went down by trying not to be an addict. You know, he's looking for a cure, and it took him down for 7 days. So I do have some experience with drugs, and I lost a close friend from a hit of meth on her birthday in the arms of her husband, who's also an injection drug user. Right? And I had 2 friends that were living with me, both OD and go unconscious from the same stuff. That was actually a pharmaceutical drug in Spain, in the Canary Islands. So I don't want to go through all of the people I've known who've used drugs and all the troubles I've seen by people who use drugs, or the people who use alcohol, because most of my stories have to do with alcohol. But I have plenty of stories. I'm not a big drug user. I've never been a big drug user, okay? It's just, to be perfectly honest, my drug is alcohol. So I guess I am a big drug user. I like to drink a gin and tonic every day, well, not every day, but you know, because at the end of the day, when I'm done working, I want to relax, it does it. Anyway, to get back to the whole problem that we have, I hope I didn't lose my train of thought here. You can blot that out if I did. But yeah, take me out. You start. People tend to have a tendency to think about the drug problem from the perspective of what they know, right? They don't think about it from the perspective of the drug problem. Okay, so yeah, I know a guy who's got all. You can't legalize that stuff. You know, he's really had a bad time. That screwed him over, right? Okay, that's a good story. It screwed him over. But we're talking about a drug war. We're not talking about your friend. I'd love for your friend not to have had that problem. But remember, that happened during the drug war. The drug war didn't stop your friend from having a problem. I don't think that stopping the drug war will give your friend a problem. He already has a problem. So the only argument people have is like, well, it'll get a lot worse. Well, we know that that's not going to happen. We've tried the experiment. We tried the experiment with prohibition in America. Right? Nobody can remember that, but gee, pick up a book and read about it. Things got bad when we prohibited alcohol, and they got better when we stopped prohibiting alcohol. They didn't eliminate all the problems. Like, look around you and see, there's many, many problems with alcohol. But it was worse back then when it was banned. And Portugal did the experiment. Thank you, Portugal. That's very nice of you. In many ways, you're a rotten country. You know, I'm amazed. Somebody challenged me on how much they earn, and I looked it up, and their per capita income is less than half of ours. Okay, it's like I thought they were doing better than that. But thank you for doing the experiment, because we now have 10 years or more, maybe 11, of what happens when you legalize all the drugs. Well, guess what happens? Everything gets better. I mean, there's not a single negative. Fewer people use drugs, fewer people OD on drugs, there are fewer criminals, there are fewer murders. There's like, wow, that worked. So we've done the experiment. That matches exactly what you would project to have happen if you just thought about it from a theoretical standpoint. Okay, I'm not an economist, but I do have an MBA from the University of Chicago, so a lot of it rubbed off. And the economics of the drug war are just ridiculous, okay? There's a fantastic guy, I think it's Jeffrey is his first name, but Jeffrey Myron wrote an article, I think it was in the 1991 Journal of Economic Perspectives. He just lays it out like a good economist should. And no, the economics of the drug war are horrible. Everything that you would expect to happen from an economic perspective did happen, and it was all bad. Well, I don't know why you even have to talk about it. But, you know, that was 25 years ago, and you still have to talk about it. So anyway, you flash forward back to the future, or to the present. It's worse than that, because it's not just this. Like you'll have fewer people dying from overdoses. That's just the tip of the iceberg. It's not just that the criminals won't be able to make any money and they'll have to quit shooting each other to fighting over a territory problem. It's so much bigger than that. That every time I go there, honestly, I just get blank stares. People they quit listening. They tune out because I start sounding like a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I really think there's a fairly good academic argument against conspiracies, and it goes back to what I said. Every criminal, has friends that talk. Well, every conspirator guy has friends that talk too. But I'm going to start at the very top, okay? North Korea is building nuclear bombs at a very rapid clip, period. They just tested, I think, their 5th one. They work, okay? We know how much plutonium they have. I'm not a nuclear guy, so if I make a bunch of mistakes on the names and everything in here, forgive me. But we know they're manufacturing bombs. We know how much their capacity to make them is. We know how much the amount of fissionable material they have, and they're making nuclear bombs that work. They are also manufacturing long-range missiles that don't work yet. But every time they try, they get better. And their stated goal, and there's no reason to not believe them, is to create a nuclear-tipped missile that can hit the United States. And it could be only 2 years away. It might be 10, if you want to feel comfortable. But it could be as little as 2 years away. This is not conspiracy theory. This is just what you read in every educated newspaper or magazine or academic journal that talks about it. But the thing that people where they don't seem to be able to connect the dots is North Korea gets a lot of hard cash from America's drug war. They sell methamphetamine. There's a big boycott, embargo, so they don't have many ways to trade and make money. They really only can trade with China. But they had state factories that manufactured methamphetamine, which is, as we all know, shake and bake, not hard to make, but they made good stuff, right? Very good stuff. And they put it on ships. They had shiploads of this stuff, and they shipped it to China and Australia and everywhere. They were international racketeers, and they made hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's what they spent. They spent their money on building nuclear bombs and missiles that are targeted at us. You really want to have a drug war? That's your idea of a good idea? In order to save your neighbor from what? To save him from ever having a bad trip? To save him from having an overdose? You're gonna invite North Korea to launch a nuclear missile at you? The bizarreness, it explodes my head to think about. But it's absolutely true, and it's not something I made up. It's just something I read because I've been to North Korea. And everywhere I go, I sort of tend to pay attention because it becomes a more interesting place. I've been to Pyongyang. I've seen the dead guy's body. It's not that interesting.
Sort of the old lady who swallowed a fly, looking at a problem and then creating a bigger problem in hopes they will solve the small problem.
Yeah. So one more story though before you start asking me questions.
Okay.
So it's okay. So it's just North Korea. It's just nuclear bombs. It probably won't hit Iowa. So we can go on that one. Okay. I might even have this. I don't have it in front of me. But Foreign Affairs, 1999, late in the year, November, December issue, had an article about the Taliban and exporting extremism. Right. I read it at the time, and I noted in my head the Taliban was getting 50% of their money from America's drug war. They got the other 50% from smuggling, which we're not going to talk about, but if you want to look into it, it's another government ban. Pakistan banned TVs if you didn't pay tax. It's the same, but a ban is just infinite tax. Put a big tax on flat screen TVs, but they opened up a corridor from Karachi, the port, to Afghanistan, a duty-free corridor. I don't know why I'm telling this story, but it's worth knowing, okay? These container loads of sealed container loads, right? Do not open. Got unloaded in Karachi and take that road on tractor trailers right up to Afghanistan, where they cross the border, they take the seal off, and every one of those flat screen TVs is smuggled back into Pakistan. And the Taliban taxed that smuggling, right? And so they got half the money from smuggling, half from the opium crop, okay? And the article specifically says Osama bin Laden gets a lot of his money from the drug trade. So this isn't something I made up. It's not a fancy of my imagination. I've been to Afghanistan too. In fact, on 9/11, I was headed to Afghanistan. I had a plane ticket from right here in this house to Paris to Delhi, and then you couldn't fly into Afghanistan because of the Taliban. And I've done it. So not fly, but I've done this bus ride. So you take a bus through Pakistan into the Khyber Pass and to Kabul. And I was going to spend a month watching the Taliban in Kabul because I knew that it was bizarre and it was worth seeing while it lasted. Obviously, my plane didn't take off. I was washing dishes. I heard the radio. I watched the TV. My plane never took off, so I never made it. But they were getting 50% of their money from the drug trade. Well, we have already spent another $1 trillion on the war in Afghanistan. It's not my numbers. I just Google what everybody else Googles. There's great sources out there. $1 trillion. Now, we're going to lose. Everybody knows that. As soon as we're gone, it's going to go back to the hellhole that it was. It'll be a different hellhole. But it's, the Taliban is powerful for very good reasons. And today, read your United Nations Drug Enforcement, whatever report they publish every year, and it says the Taliban gets only 40% of their money now from the opium trade. And that's because the I hate the word warlords, right? The tribal leaders, they don't let the Taliban have it all. They used to have to let the Taliban have it all because the Taliban ruled most of the country, not the whole country, but most of the country. And so the Taliban got a full 20%. Now the Taliban is collecting less of it, and they're smaller, and they only get 40%. That's our drug war. We're basically sending money to people so that they can kill our soldiers in a foreign land. It's unfathomable. And the thing about a sheriff is this. I will have a national pulpit because I ran those television ads in Washington and I got national press, which is my only objective, right? I picked up a reporter that she called me and said, my editor said you were running ads for local sheriff in Washington. What's this all about? And so I delayed her long enough until I was running my third ad, I think, and I finally gave her my interview, and she wrote a fantastic article. So I've got it in the record. If I win this race for sheriff, I become the alternative to Joe Arpaio, I think is how you pronounce his name.
From Arizona?
Yeah, wherever that guy is. I don't pay him any attention, but I know who he is, okay? He's a guy that uses his position and is both geographical and his mouth and stuff, and he's just, when he speaks, people quote him. So this is, they write a story, and then here's what John said, here's what Jane said, and here's what Joe said. I have positioned myself to be that guy, except the anti-drug war guy, okay, which is really my entire intention. My intention, I will be a hell of a good sheriff. I will be the best sheriff there's only two of us running. There's a Democrat and there's me, the Libertarian. There's no doubt. He's an okay guy, but he's trapped in 36 years of traditional law enforcement. He's a 20th century thinker. I'm a 21st century thinker. I can see that what we have done completely didn't work. It needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. Now, I also want to say this. I'm a consensus builder. I'm not going to go in and break 122 deputies. No, I'm going to go in and we're going to have the same kind of talk we're having now, except I'm going to let them talk more than I'm letting you talk. And we're going to flush this out in a positive way that all of us get on board the same program. But at the end of the road, I'm sure what my ideas are, they're going to get heavily modified because, I have one good idea a day and 99 bad ones, and I can't tell the difference from one to the other. But yeah, we're going to change it here, right here in Lynn County. We're going to change it. And we're going to work with the police force. I'm not going to try and overrule the police force. The Cedar Rapids police force is not directly under my jurisdiction, but is under my jurisdiction. And the chief of police of Cedar Rapids is going to be my best friend. Because we need to do this. We need to do it together, right? We need to change the way the system works. We need to start here, and we need to, and I won't make the police chief do this because he might be a little shy, but I'm going to make a national megaphone. And the position is, interestingly, a position in which you can do that, especially since I laid the groundwork in September. So, all right, it's your turn.
All right, so I'm getting that there's one way that you want to use a position as sheriff to change things is simply, as you're saying, is it gives you more of it gives you a pulpit. It gives you it gives you a position of authority from which more people are willing to hear you from.
Yeah, people in a position of power will be forced to sit and listen. Mm-hmm. They don't have to agree, but they will have to hear.
Probably what a lot of people are going to want to know is, directly as the sheriff, how are you going to reduce the impact of the drug war? What sort of policies or changes in the way that the laws are enforced or the interactions with the community are made do you plan to reduce the harm by the drug?
Yeah, no, that's it, and that's most of the job, because I can get up and talk easily. I don't need training, I don't need practice, I can just talk. And that's not what you do every day. What you do every day is you modify basically the thought process, which is a modification then of the in the street process of police work. Now, the current model is based on, and you know, don't hold me to every specific detail, okay? Just think about it from a general sense. But the current model is based on a managerial approach, it's based on a professionalism approach, and it's based on a broken windows approach, okay? There's obviously many modifications within there, but that's sort of what it is. If we arrest enough people, that's the broken window theory, right? If we arrest enough people, then everyone will know that it's not a good place to commit crimes. That's in a nutshell. Well, the problem is arresting people for drugs or for public intoxication or for any victimless crime doesn't teach other people anything. It just teaches them that you're basically bad people. You, the police, you're bad people. That's what it teaches them, because you're clearly doing bad things. You know, we used to go, we picked you up if you were drunk and gave you a ride back to your house. That's what you should be doing. And if you were drunk and you were driving, okay, we didn't automatically issue you an OMVI. We took it extremely seriously. But we knew all of the drunk drivers. So when we go to a bar, when we went to a bar, and we'd see somebody there that we knew had a bad habit of driving home, we just take him home. You don't, you know, there was never a single instance of a tragedy or a death or anything else that could possibly have been prevented by a law or an arrest. Now, people did get arrested for drunk driving, no doubt about it. Okay, but that's the goal. I like to say it this way: the goal of law enforcement is to make no arrests. Because if you make no arrests, that means that there were no crimes with victims. Nobody was assaulted, there were no personal injury crimes, and there was no theft, there was no robbery. So you didn't have to arrest anybody. That's your goal. Your goal is to eliminate body assault crimes, right, of every nature, okay? Hitting, cutting, shooting, raping, no. Eliminate them, so you never have to make an arrest. And eliminate property crimes, so you never have to make an arrest. Now, within that context, you have a ways to go. Society, you know, we are people, and there are people out there who, they don't learn very quickly how to interact in a society. But if your goal is to not make any arrests, and you view every arrest as a failure, you will always ask yourself, how can I not make that mistake again? Because I failed to prevent that rape. What do I do today to start figuring out how to prevent it? Because I failed. That's the mentality that you have to have. You don't want a mentality that says, I succeeded, I arrested a rapist. I succeeded, I arrested an arsonist. I succeeded, I arrested the guy that shot his wife. That is not success, because the wife is dead, the girl got raped, and the house is burned down. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean you don't arrest him. That means that you arrest him and you're kicking yourself for not having prevented it. That's an entirely different mentality. And what it really does is it requires them to rethink. Now, I have my ideas. I understand that, like I said before, I have lots of ideas and many of them are bad, and other people have many ideas that are fantastic. And that's what I like to get. So this is not just one way, my way thinking. But at this point in time, I'm going to give my little speech because, you know, that's where I'm at right now, okay? And I evolve every day. But, you know, what we've done, we've turned police into stormtroopers. We've really, have you ever seen the inside of a police car?
Oh, yeah.
Recently?
Oh, 6 years ago.
Yeah. Well, today it looks like something you could launch a rocket to NASA. It's like a space show. Mm-hmm. It's like, whoa, man, you know, it's all this blah blah blah. It's against a lot of text and drive. And yet you can the policemen, they've got all these things going on. It's like, oh my gosh, you know, most of that stuff is just trash and should be thrown away. Okay, let me show you what's probably the most effective police tool that we have today. Okay, that's a smartphone. You don't need anything more than what a smartphone can do. You just need to have a smartphone that works the way that allows you to do the things that you should be doing. And what you should be doing if you're a law enforcement officer, there are specialty functions, but generally speaking, a patrol officer on the street, what they should be doing is they should be cultivating a friendship and a knowledge with probably around 500 people. They should have 500 people on a text list or a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group or an Instagram following and stuff. They should have about 500, and these should be 500 people that they know. They probably see each of them once a week, okay, with exceptions. Mm-hmm. There might be some you see every day, but you see them all the time. And you're the guy that they know cares about them. You're the guy. You're their best friend in good times, right? And you're their only friend in bad times. You're the go-to guy for things that are bad. You know, I like to say also, nobody ever came into a police station and said, "Hey, it's just having a great day, and I want to let you know that everything's working out fine today." That's not the way it works. No, you need to have about 500 people, and that's a reasonable number. I would like to say that it was only 200, but the problem with that is that you don't want to just hire extra police officers so you can get a 200 to 1 ratio. And the other part of it is they need to be the right people. So we know that who commits crimes? Well, it's pretty simple. Boys between the ages of 14 and about 34. That's when they start developing into men, and then by the time they're actually maybe 37, but crime-wise, let's say 34, that's when they become men. That entire biological process, their bodies are changing, their minds are changing, their hormones are changing, they're becoming men. And it's a tumultuous time. And biologically, we did strange things. We did very destructive things. We did amazingly bizarre, stupid, just we don't want to talk about it things. But they still do. My block, one block down, right at the end of my alley, 2 weeks ago, a 13-year-old girl was shot in the head and killed by a 14-year-old boy. That's a 14-year-old boy. He did a horrible, 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 horrible thing. But when you look at who does horrible, horrible, horrible things, it's all those 14 to 34-year-old boys. Not every one of them, but many of them. Those people need to be brought into an environment which causes the least amount of destruction, the lowest number of murders, the least amount of property crime, the least amount of keying cars, of stealing bicycles. There were just, I think, 24 bicycles stolen from College within the last 2 weeks. That's a guy. Trust me on this. It's not a woman out there stealing those bicycles. And I will put good money down that he's between the ages of 14 and 34. And I will bet anything, because it's so obvious, that he's got friends that don't steal bicycles that know he did. Now, what we need to do is we need to prevent it from happening, and in order to prevent the future, because you can't prevent the past, you need to know who he is, and you need to go and have a really long talk with him, and you need to have some kind of process that causes future crimes to stop and doesn't destroy anybody's lives in the process. This guy probably shouldn't go to Fort Madison at $60,000 a year. That's our Iowa penitentiary. That's not probably the correct thing to do. It might be, I don't know him, it might be time for this guy to do some time. It might not be. It could be somebody that just figured out he could steal bicycles and get away with it. But what we do know is we're not going to prevent the next bicycle theft until we identify the guy, and that's our job, is to prevent the next one. Okay? The structure of the police department needs to be changed so that we are completely plugged into the community. Roughly speaking, there are bad guys. There aren't very many bad guys. I don't know if the bicycle thief was a bad guy, but I know that a 14-year-old boy can't possibly be a bad guy. He's a good guy that did some horrible, 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 horrible thing that will be with him and with us and the girl's family and all kinds of other people forever. But that doesn't make him a bad guy. There are bad guys, but if you just do the math on it, my estimate is in all of Lynn County, there's probably about 22.
So you're looking at community policing by offering chances at redemption rather than retribution.
Well, redemption is actually a little bit further along the line. Yeah, I mean, it's clear that vengeance is the worst possible policing idea for everyone. And I don't think it's normally police probably suffer from it the same as everyone else, but unfortunately, people like vengeance. Yeah, the population likes vengeance. They pass laws for vengeance. Vengeance doesn't serve any purpose whatsoever. The purpose of punishment, right, is sort of three things. It's punishment. You know, you're going to have to do something because you've screwed up. But it's deterrence, okay? So we want to deter you, but we really also want to deter everybody else. So there's deterrence, and then there's justice, because there is a victim, and the victim needs to, they're never going to feel whole. You know, if you have somebody shoot you in the leg and you know, you're crippled for life, you're not going to feel whole. If you've been raped, you're never going to feel whole. But you do need to get justice, okay? And there's this whole thing called restorative justice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's so obvious. I can't believe that it isn't on every police officer's badge. And every judge's, whatever they wear. I mean, restorative justice, how can anybody argue against restorative justice? But vengeance doesn't enter into it at all. There is nothing to do with vengeance. You know, no, the primary purpose is prevention. Yeah, a little bit of punishment because there needs to be that. But so the criminologist, Gary Becker, is a Nobel Prize-winning economist who unfortunately is no longer with us, but you know, he was the one who moved the area of sociology into economics. So he studied social problems with economics, and you know, he developed the framework. I'm not 100% familiar with the literature, but he developed the framework where there's two things that deter criminals. One of them is the chances of getting caught, and the other one is the severity of the punishment. And that he modeled them as rational decision makers who looked at the benefit and looked at the possibility of getting caught and the cost of getting caught, and made a rational judgment to commit a crime. That's what a criminal does. Well, it's a good theory, but it's turned out, because we've done lots of research on this, that's only half true. The criminal looks at his chances of getting caught and doesn't pay any attention at all to the length of the sentence. Yeah, so long sentences they have nothing to do with prevention. I'm not saying that they've never prevented anybody ever. I'm saying that in the grand scheme of things, the factors that are the amount of influence that length of sentence has on deterring crime rounds to zero. So don't do that, because you're the one who's paying for it. You're paying $1 million to give somebody a 10-year mandatory sentence that has no impact. Mm-hmm. So why don't you just burn your money? I mean, it has no impact. So, I mean, even remember the guy in Norway, the greatest mass murderer, well, criminal mass murderer. There's been a lot of official mass murders, but the number one shooter in recent history, the guy that killed over 100 people just down on an island and started killing them, bloodthirsty guy. Norway, you know, his maximum sentence is 20 years. Now, Norwegians themselves are outraged right now because it's been, I think, 10. Which means, you know, he could get off on parole. But nevertheless, you know, that's just an example of the difference in mindset between vengeful Americans who are prodded by politicians. You know, we have laws, we have vengeance laws that are named after children. Really? I mean, this child died, and we name a vengeance law after her? That is just so anti-human. It's unbelievable. So we need to wipe out the vengeance thing. And I think police can go a long ways in that too. You know, if police preached against vengeance, a lot of the people that like vengeance, they like to think of the cops coming in and making this big arrest and busting their butts and throwing them in jail and like slamming the door. It's like, you know, they need to have the cop come out and say, hey, get a little control of yourself. Because that's not the way it works, buddy. You're on the wrong side. You got to get on my side. My side is anti-vengeance because it doesn't work. It's horrible. It does exactly the wrong thing. You know, you got to get with me. And unfortunately, a lot of times the law enforcement they take the guy who's worshiping them, right, and they accept the worship. No, they got to get that guy to be on our side, the non-vengeful side, because it just has no. I love vengeance. Hell, you don't think I like vengeance? I've had enough interactions in my life. I've been robbed. I've been held up at gunpoint. I've been, a guy tried to hold us up with a machete. We chased him away. But those things stick with you forever. You don't think I want vengeance? Yeah, I want vengeance on those guys. They gave me not just a bad day, but I can work myself up about it right now. And yeah, I want vengeance, but no, society doesn't want vengeance. But individuals' vengeance is perfectly understandable. Society, we don't need any. What we do need is we need to minimize, and minimize basically means it's a goal of zero. Our goal should be a goal of zero traffic deaths on the highway. That's what Sweden's is. I don't think Iowa has a goal, or maybe if they do, it's like we want them to be 5% lower. But the real goal should be zero. I don't want anybody to die. That's why I'm a fairly big proponent of self-driving cars, because it's clear that there's going to be just plummeting number of traffic deaths once we get the people out of the equation.
Yeah.
You got to take the people out. So anyway, yeah, I segued again and didn't let you actually finish your question, but.
Oh no, I finished and you answered it very well. You kind of got into the next thing that I want to talk about, which is victimless crimes in general. I knew that you had issue with the drug war and stuff, but I wondered if you carried the same logic through to victimless crimes, and it seems like you do. It seems like that you're more concerned with creating harmony within communities than you are with a compulsive enforcement of the laws. And I think that that's maybe where another place where we get from Mayberry's Andy to where we're at today is this idea that a law is something that must be compulsively forced rather than a guideline to say, listen, if someone's engaging this behavior and it becomes harmful to others around them, then we'll enforce the law. But enforcing it compulsively does no good except for as vengeance.
Yeah, no. It's a tricky area because I can't just go in and say, well, we're not going to enforce the law anymore. Okay? Well, I could say that, but that would be really bad politics. Yeah, I mean, that's not the idea, right? This is a process, and we're going to get there, and we're going to get there with everybody on board. So I'm not going to throw rocks on the tracks. But we're definitely going to start with crimes that have victims. And bodily assault is going to be more important than property damage, okay? Just because I value your life more than anything you own. And I am going to try and protect that first. After that, I am going to work really hard to make sure that your stuff remains your stuff and that somebody else doesn't mess with it. I don't like people messing with my stuff, and I don't think anybody does. And that's important, when somebody messes with my stuff, my bicycle that got stolen, it's like it just sticks with you for a long time because it's rolling around in your head and it takes time to get out of that. That's a crime, and there's somebody perpetrated it. But when you get past that, okay, I've had my bicycle stolen 3 times, twice from this house, once from my garage, once I had it parked, and then the other time was at Kirkwood College. There was no police interest. They come out and they just joke around. Well, we can't do anything. Well, okay, no, I think that's an acceptable response. But how are you going to prevent the next one? Well, my bicycle was stolen, I think it was 2008, from a bike rack at Kirkwood College during the middle of the day. And I just told you, there were, I think they said 20 bicycles stolen from College in the last 2 weeks. Wouldn't you have thought that a police department that was thinking about that would have said, how are we going to stop thieves from stealing bicycles from college campuses? And if they had thought about that, I think they would have solved the problem. Now, I can't say that my first idea is the best idea. All I can say is that's the challenge. Prevent the next one from happening until you get it down to zero. Always be thinking about how to prevent. So anyway, when it comes to the other victimless crimes, which are, walking while drunk, public intoxication, being a public nuisance, what the hell does that mean? These are laws that should be just wiped off the books, okay? And the very idea that all it is, and as a policeman, I can guarantee this, that's what you go to when you can't figure out something else to charge them with. You can always charge them with public intoxication. Number one, all those kinds of people have always had at least one beer, and that's all it takes. Public intoxication. I know a guy who, was, I know more than a couple, this is the most recent, was at a bar and he knew he was too drunk to drive home, and so, he walked home. And the cops pulled up beside him, this is in Cedar Rapids, and they rolled up and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he goes, "Well, I thought I had too many, I shouldn't be driving home." And they literally they said, "Well, if you've had too many to drive, you've had too many to walk." And they arrested him and made him spend the night in jail. That's just insane. I mean, that's subhuman. I don't understand, I don't have the slightest ability to fathom why an honest law enforcement department would allow that to happen. The guy who made that arrest, seriously, he should be doing laps the next day. He should be doing push-ups. He should be, they should have him working the refuse collection route for a week so he can get it through his head that it makes no sense whatsoever. That's not what law enforcement is there for. But you want to go a little bit higher. Usually the place where people abandon me is when it gets to prostitution, okay? There's this whole thing, and Melissa Farley is a famous island from Iowa City who is on the other side from me, right, on this. But, their view is that a woman is always, prostitute is always being a victim, okay, and that they don't have self-agency. And I don't want to speak for any woman, and I don't want to speak for any prostitute, but when you let prostitutes speak for themselves, you hear something different. And what I have heard, and I haven't spoken to every prostitute, is most of them feel that they actually are in control. They don't necessarily feel that they are in the best space of their life, but they feel they are working toward a goal, which is a better place, and which probably will not involve prostitution. It's a moral crime, okay? It offends the morality of someone. And it apparently offends the morality of the majority of people. And so the majority of people vote, and then it's illegal. That's how most of these things happen. But it is a morality question, and it is not a bodily injury or property damage question, except for the people, and I will sit and listen to Melissa Farley all day long, and I will listen carefully, because if you don't listen, you'll never learn, and I learn all the time. But I can't understand her argument, because I feel that she is attempting to speak for other people in a definitive way, in an absolute way, which allows them not to disagree. And I want to listen to them, and I want to listen to her. But when it comes down to I have to pick one, I'm going to listen to the person who's personally impacted. And I'm not going to listen to the person who is talking about that person. Because that's got to be real. Even if I disagree, it's still, that's the person. That's the prostitute. Mm-hmm. And she's got a higher level of, in my heart, of belief than the person who's talking about the prostitute. So that's where I am on that one, is when I listen to the prostitutes, they say, legalize it, don't tax it, don't make us get these medical examinations. That'll evolve on its own, you know. That just raises the price and causes some of us to be illegal, which is the wrong thing. Don't find the Johns, don't find the pimps, don't find anybody. Just live and let live. Because we're in an age when women, even prostitutes, have power. Now, child prostitutes, no. Okay? Now, why do I say that? Well, I'm a very bad fan. I don't like any of these things that say you can do this and you can't do this until you're 16. You can't do this until you're 18. You can't do this until you're 21. I'm especially not a fan of, you can never do this. But those are all arbitrary ages, which the government decides they have some kind of deep knowledge that a person who's 17 and a half years old is not old enough to vote. But a person who's 18 and a half is. Every single one. Well, it's just so obviously wrong. I mean, no, we don't know that. And you can do the same thing for driver's licenses. You can do the same thing for drinking alcohol, buying tobacco, being a prostitute, whatever. If you draw a line, the problem is that the line's not accurate. Now, you can say, but it's the best line we have. Okay, it is the best line we have. That means that there are fewer people who have been incorrectly given the right to vote and denied the right to vote than there would be under any other line. But that doesn't mean that you've solved the problem. That means you've just drawn your best line. And maybe we shouldn't have a line. Or maybe we should make somebody else responsible for the line. Like, maybe we should make parents responsible for the line of when a child is old enough to drink. Maybe we should make maybe a grandparent. How about we let the grandparents decide when the child is old enough to smoke? I don't know. But why would that be any worse than having the government decide when the time for everyone to smoke? I'm sure some grandparents would make mistakes. I'm sure some parents would make mistakes. But those mistakes are made by the government. And are we going to have more mistakes or fewer mistakes if we let parents and grandparents make the decisions? I don't know on prostitution, who gets to make the decision on prostitution. I don't know, you know? But it seems to me that we should be able to sit down and ask ourselves that question and not pretend that, you know, when you reach a certain age, voila, you can have sex with people now. I don't get it. I just don't see how that helps society. A conversation does, you know, a really long, prolonged, continual conversation does. But a law that creates criminals out of people on one side of the line and honest citizens on the other side? Oh my gosh. I don't fathom how we think that can be successful.
It's not successful, and this is one of those issues I've written about and spoken about. Are you familiar with Celeste Guap?
Which one is she?
She's a young lady from the San Francisco Bay Area who, as it turned out, beginning when she was 17 years old, began sleeping with a number of officers in 5 different departments in the area. And this year it sort of blew up as sort of a sex scandal, and a lot of people...
This year it blew up as one?
Yeah. And
I'm so out of touch.
Yeah.
I live in Iowa. I live in my little house where I've lived for 40 years. I don't get the news. You notice I don't have a TV.
Which is a good thing.
And I don't subscribe to the newspaper, right? And I'm not a news junkie. I get news because it comes in from different directions, but I'm not a news junkie, so I frequently don't know what happened today or last week, even though I know a lot about what happened in the past. Yeah, I don't tend to pay too much attention. I tend to not ever read any history until it's 50 years old. Mm-hmm. It's not worth reading. You know, I mean, it takes 50 years to write history. But I know a lot of what's going on, and then I know absolutely nothing. So, yeah, I haven't heard this one.
But she was one of those cases where when this all sort of blew up, everyone wanted to call her a victim and said that the police victimized her. And while in some ways you can make that case because there's a power differential there, in another way it's clear from her own testimony and statement that the sex that she had, that she desired, enjoyed, did not regret, made an informed decision to have it.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that calling the police predators was the right thing to do there. What was wrong is that they hypocritically enforced these laws for others while themselves playing loose and fast with them. I also think that Celeste Guap had a right to an agency to have that sex, and the officers, as human beings, not as officers, did as well. I don't see that there's any problem there. Celeste's mother was a police dispatcher. It was Celeste's mom, maybe, who should have stepped in if this was a problem, but not the public. So where I see the problem there is just the inconsistency and hypocrisy, and that's, I guess, becomes one of my larger problems. A lot of times police are arrested for, drugs or whatever, and I could really care less if an officer wants to use drugs. I think everyone should be able to use their body in the ways that they want to. The issue for me becomes consistency. The issue is that there are different sets of standards from one person to the next. So
there's a completely different set of standards. Yeah, no, police standards are fraternity, and the standards that they apply to you are absolutely not the standards. I had an interesting thing after I was a policeman. I had a Volkswagen that had been in an accident, and the left headlight aimed up at about 45 degrees. And I'm driving it down the road in the dark, right? And the cop comes, flashes up behind me. This is after I'd been fired, right? And he flashes up behind me. I mean, if anybody deserved a ticket for a traffic violation, it's having your headlight 45-degree angles because you just hadn't bothered to have it fixed yet. And he walks up and he goes, "You got it." "Oh, hi Rick, how are you doing?" And that was the end of the conversation. Just like we chatted. You know, the law didn't apply to me. It applied to the unknown person. So that's just a tiny thing, but trust me, that's exactly the way it works. The police have a set of laws that apply to them. They have a different set of laws that applies to everybody else.
So when you talk about, as sheriff, trying to change things in a cultural sense, in the sense that as a true leader, not as, you know, not as the boss, but as a leader, someone who's willing to show people new ideas and new ways, and allowing also their input so that you can experiment. What kind of ideas do you plan to inject in there in order to break up this sort of ideology of superiority and separateness and being above the law?
Okay, number one, we aren't going to call ourselves majors and lieutenants and colonels anymore. We're not going to have military titles. We're a police department. It didn't strike me as right the very first time I heard sergeant. Chief, I understand, because there's no chief in the military, right? Maybe there's a chief of staff, I don't know. But the sergeant, I didn't get it the very first time I heard it. It's not the military. Let's use different words. So that's number one. That's just easy, right? Now I'm going to talk them into it, right? I'm not going to just strip their badges off their uniforms. We're going to de-uniform. Okay. I don't know what it's going to be. I'm not a designer or anything like that, but yeah, we're gonna your sidearm is, you're still going to have it, right? But it's going to be in the car. Now you're going to have access to it, but it's not going to be you're not going to wear it out of the car, right? And you're not going to have handcuffs on your belt. You're not going to have twist ties sticking out of your pocket just in case you need to handcuff somebody. No, you're going to look like somebody that you'd like to talk to, okay? Some people say, I don't mind talking to a police officer, and I say, yeah, well, you're also not a criminal, and you're not even hanging out with criminals. And I don't need to guard you. You're safe because you don't break the law. I need to be tight with people who do break the law, and all of this paraphernalia distances me, and the uniform itself distances me. We're not going to look like clowns, you know. I'm not, but I think of it as like, you know what Casual Friday is? Mm-hmm. There's no definition, but everybody gets it, right? Mm-hmm. We all know that okay, it's Casual Friday. You can do that kind of thing with police officers. I might even say, hey, listen, we're going to have a Casual Friday. We'll start with that. No uniforms required. Casual Friday. We'll see how it works. I believe that de-uniforming would really be better for everybody, because you feel more comfortable out of uniform. The uniform separates you as a policeman from me too. It's not just a one-way street. It absolutely does. Okay, so but also cars. Okay, right now our police cars, I'm sorry, but they look like assault weapons. There's no reason for a police car. A police car should be the friendliest looking car. Now, we're not going to, put a happy face on a Volkswagen, right? But we're going to have friendly cars. They're not going to. I don't know. Again, it's a design issue. There's all kinds of thoughts, but every police car should say, "Hi, you're my friend. I'm your friend." It should say, "Jump on in." There's another one. Anytime there's an empty seat in a police car, any citizen should be able to flag the cop down and say, hey, I want to get in. And yeah, of course you can get in. Now, I can't take you to where I'm not a taxi. I'm still doing what I'm doing. But you can ride with me. There's an empty seat. Why would I not? It's like I should see a friend walking down the street and I should pull over and say, hey, get in. I'll give you a ride. And if my friend sees me, hey, it's Rick. Oh, hey, get in. That's the kind of police we need. The other one is we need to walk. It's not a riding around job. I read, somebody said this and it didn't click completely, even though I know it for a fact personally. But he said that the biggest thing that, besides the drug war, right, that started separating police from people was air conditioning in the police car. Because then they had to roll their windows up. As soon as they rolled their windows up, they weren't communicating. They used to ride around with their arm out the side and, hey, Joe, and Joe, hey, it's like the air conditioning. It's the same thing. You have to get out of the car. And when in the process of learning who those 500 people are, you have a neighborhood. It's back to the neighborhood beat. Right? And you walk the neighborhood and you knock on the doors. And the person goes, hey, come on in. Now I can only stay for a minute. They don't go, oh, did I do something wrong? That's what they do now. I mean, my neighborhood is 20% felons. So when I was getting my signatures for my to get on the ballot, I had to ask people, and felons can't vote. They can't sign my petition. 20%. I went to a house. There were 3 out of 4 were felons. These were not predators. They're just poor guys that got caught. Remember, I said the cognitively non-elite are the ones that get arrested. They're the cognitively non-elite. And they can't vote, and they have all kinds of other problems too. Getting jobs are hard because you have to check the box. There's somebody else in the house that's out, and you lose your food stamps. And I'm not even in favor of food stamps, but if you're going to have food stamps, don't take them away from the poor guy who you've taken his job away from him because he was smoking some pot and got caught because he's not quite as sharp as you are. That's just so. I don't know any, I mean, I use the word drug war criminals. Usually I'm talking about Congress, the politicians, right? Those are the real criminals because they know better. They're not stupid, right? They just know they can get extra votes if they pump the drug war. So they are real drug war criminals. But down lower, it's like that's criminal too to ruin people's lives just because you've got the power. And I don't want to take the power away from policemen. I want to take the belief in their power as somehow or another different, that makes them different from the rest of us. I want to take that belief away, not their ability to do things. If we do have, I praise the Cedar Rapids police for catching those 3 kids within 10 minutes after they shot the girl, right? I mean, you do need that kind of stuff. You need policemen that can do that and that are willing to do that. But you don't want that to morph over into, like, I'm a superior human being to you. Something I really don't like at all is this hero worship. I don't like it for firemen, but I sure as hell don't like it for policemen. It's exactly the wrong message. And every time a police officer is killed in the line of duty, and there were 42 of them last year shot, right? There were 52 that died in automobile accidents. But when a police officer is shot in the line of duty, they have what essentially is a national parade of mourning, right? And I really think that's a bad idea. I think that's just a very, very bad idea. It's not a dangerous job if you compare it to other jobs like fisherman or logger or UPS driver.
Number 18.
I'm not saying it's, or what?
Number 18.
Is it 18? I was going to give it 13. Last time I looked, I couldn't find it, but yeah, it's not top 10. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not a tragedy every time a police officer dies. And it does seem especially tragic when it's in the line of duty. But we can't think about personal tragedy. We have to think about a nation. And when you're thinking about a nation, you have to set aside those personal tragedy feelings, and you have to ask yourself, how can we maximize the value for everybody in the country? You're supposed to protect and serve every single person. The guy that you don't like, you're supposed to protect and serve him exactly the same as the guy who's your best friend. And when you have a mentality of arrest and incarcerate, what happens is you arrest and incarcerate the guy you don't like, and you let your friend off. That's called corruption. But when you have a mentality of prevent every crime, this guy that you don't like becomes your friend. You don't have to be bosom buddies, but he's your friend because if you connect with him in any way, he might help you prevent the next crime. And your friend, it becomes your friend. It's a complete reversal of the attitude that we're here to arrest and incarcerate, because that's not our job. That's a failure. Our job is to protect and serve, and that means everybody on the same level.
So it sounds like in almost always you want to rebrand policing, from the cars, the clothes, the attitudes, the culture itself. Do you think that there's a bonus and just working towards completely rebranding it and say we don't have police anymore? We have people in our community who are adept at helping people with their problems.
I would love to run that experiment. I would love to see that run. We have small towns that have volunteer fire departments. Now, I've never been a volunteer fireman, but a little bit of that is because that's really hard work. They have standards you can't believe, right? They don't just take you in because you want to be a fireman. They train amazingly. They work so hard at that job. And you know what? They're really good. And they're volunteers. They are really, really good. So, same size town. Why can't you have a volunteer police department? We do sort of have this imaginary volunteer police department. It's called special deputies or something like that. I forget exactly the terminology here, but the special force, not the special forces, the special force. And yeah, you have to apply, you have to pass a physical, you have to pass a mental test, and you have to get training, and then you get a right to ride around in a car. There's certain, you know, it's a structured program. It's a managerial program. Remember I said that the professionalism and managerialism and broken windows? Well, that's the managerial part. We got this manager thing. We're gonna, oh gosh, it cracks me up when I think about it, but we're gonna certify you as a special deputy, right? You know, I think that 100% volunteer thing is absolutely an experiment. I'd like to see it made somewhere. I don't think Lynn County is the place to start, but it might be. It might be. You know, it takes a lot of thought. There's a lot of places where volunteers probably don't do very well. I mean, in the company that I started, we had 300 people and they got paid. We sort of started out volunteers. In fact, I was a volunteer for the first 2 years. But as we got bigger, we needed to pay people because otherwise you couldn't find anybody to do the job. And maybe you couldn't find people to do the voluntary work in a city like Cedar Rapids. I don't know. I'd love to see the experiment. I'm fairly certain it would work in a smaller town. I think it needs to be thought about differently. I don't necessarily trust the entrenched interest right now to come up with the best way to create a volunteer force, because I know that what I've seen is those small towns that don't hire a full-time officer but they hire a part-time officer, they are not always the best. And I don't mean professionalism, I just mean there's various reasons why people volunteer for that job. They aren't all good.
Yeah.
yeah, it's a strange thing. But let me throw something else out. Yeah, it's a segue, but I think it's important. We've created the situation where you have to have all this training. I don't even know if you have to have your bachelor's degree in order to be a police officer here, but I think you do, because they get plenty of applications. They get plenty of applications because it's a good paying job. 20 years in, you got a pension. Maybe we should not allow anybody to have a college degree. Because the people with college degrees are not the people that are committing the crimes. Maybe we should only hire people that have only got a high school diploma. Because it's going to be a lot easier for them to relate to people who only have a high school diploma than it is for this college guy. Because this college guy, he's a snob. He doesn't really believe anybody that doesn't have a college degree is on his same level. And I need people who think they're on the same level. I need people who can relate. I think the relationship thing, you know, that's the kind of test. I don't know exactly how to measure it, but I'm sure we can work on it. The test of whether you can become a policeman, there probably should be no physical at all, period. I don't care if you're big and fat. If you're the guy who can get everybody in the block to like you and tell you who might commit the next crime, and you can go over and tell that guy not to, and it works, I don't care who you are. You can be anybody. You know, you can be shooting up heroin in the closet if you prevent crime in 1,000 population. You know, it's results. So yeah, get rid of all those, and then the training, right? I think that I was thinking about this the other day. I think that I'm in favor of training. I love training. I personally train myself all the time. I went back and took a class at the University of Chicago just a few years ago in international economics because, you know, I really wanted to know more. Like I told you, I did my calculus classes at Kirkwood. I love training, but training is not a be-all and a do-all. It needs to be the right training to the right person at the right time. And the right time to get that training might very well be after you've proven that you can connect with people on the street, and you can, and they trust you, and you trust them, and you are. I'm a defender of my 500. You know, they're mine, and I'm going to protect them from you, the guy who's my boss, right? Don't screw around with my people, because I'm doing a good job with them. That's the kind of person, the mentality that you need. This is my spot, you know, and they all trust me, and I don't rip any of them off, and there's no corruption here whatsoever. They trust me because I'm doing a great job for them. And I think that's a psychological thing. That's what we need there. We don't need a guy who's, you know, big and tough and can wrap heads and make arrests. That's not what we need. So, totally voluntary? I'd love to see the experiment. And I bet you in a town of, how small can you go? It's got to be big enough that they do have officers now, okay? If you just go to a small town that doesn't have any, then you haven't proven much. But if you just get a town of 6,000 people and say, we're going to pay one person. We're going to pay the chief. Let's call him the chief. And the rest of you are going to be volunteers, right? Damn, that'd be a good experiment to run. Most of the world runs that way. Mm-hmm. Not the developed world, but most of the world. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. In fact, most of the world. I have an apartment I maintain down in Guatemala, so I spend as much time as I can down there. The last thing you would call if you had a problem would be the police. And they're the most corrupt thing you could imagine. You call the police and they'll just come and shake you down. That's all they'll do. So the villages, right? They have their own volunteer departments that enforce their own justice. Yeah. Sometimes they're cruel. Yeah. If they catch a thief, sometimes they'll burn them alive. That's my country. Definitely, that's Guatemala. That's where I live. That's a little overboard. Okay. But they do have voluntary policing in relatively large villages. I don't know exactly. It's hard to tell sometimes how the populations of these, but they don't trust anybody else. They just police themselves. So why wouldn't it work here?
That was how this country really worked from its inception for many years.
Oh,
modern
yeah.
policing is a fairly modern phenomenon.
Very modern. Yep, very modern.
So you're talking about training, and I've actually written about this a lot. And maybe it's when we talk about training in the context of what it is right now. But what I see with training is I see it strengthening a lot of impulses and instincts which become dangerous. I see training as programming somebody to a certain set of coordinates and telling them exactly how to act with them, which is getting a lot of people shot right now. When someone is this many feet away from you, they can kill you and you get a shoot. And I think that can be problematic. And so when I discuss training, I like to talk about less training. I think when you're talking about training, you're not talking about a single course of training, but something more catered to the individuals, the volunteers. Am I correct there?
Yeah, no, that's why I said it should come later. It should come after you've proven that you're capable of being a good officer. And now we will train you in some other things, okay? But you're absolutely dead on correct. And I don't know, you sound like you already know what they do on this training. They, there's basically, you can sort of just point your finger at that one single video, the knife guy. Have you seen that?
Which one?
Yeah, there's a famous video where the guy with the knife is, I forget, 16 feet away. And he comes and kills you before you can get your gun out of your holster. Yeah, and that has just been shown in training sessions millions of times. And that's where you get the shoot first, think later.
I can't remember the guy's name, but I've actually written about him before. And he's toured the entire country training police departments over and over again.
Oh yeah.
That these are the conditions in which you get a shoe. And even as libertarian. Part of the reason that I kind of left libertarianism is I saw the same thing happening with the non-aggression principle. For me, the non-aggression principle was a beautiful way to look at how we can foster peace. And what I saw happening with it is vengeful libertarians who wanted to use it as a guideline when they get to shoot.
Well, there's a huge difference between a person on his own property getting to shoot versus a police officer serving the public good getting to shoot.
Yeah.
The police officer is not protecting his own property. In theory, he's serving and protecting you. Okay? If the guy, if I'm on my property and you come at me, the idea that I get to shoot you doesn't mean I have to shoot you, but it does mean that I don't have to let you kill me because of non-aggression. I don't think I want to let somebody kill me. And I don't know if I'm brave enough to pull the trigger. I never had to discharge my gun at a person. It's hard to do, and it's hard to imagine until you've done it. I know that in some of those instances I talked about where in Guatemala, I play those scenarios over in my head all the time as if I had a gun. Yeah, yeah. And so it's probably a good thing I did.
Yeah.
I am a gun owner. I'm a gun owner. I have a permit. I shoot a lot for recreation. I love the sport of shooting targets. Yeah. For me, I started when I was a little kid, and then I didn't do it for a long time. But I did the NRA classes with 22 rifles. I had a great instructor, and then I was in Boy Scouts, and of course got my marksmanship merit badge. And I carried as an officer. So I feel very comfortable around guns. Well, I should say this. I feel very comfortable around my own guns. I'm not so comfortable with other people. No, it's a high stress thing, right? I mean, you go on red alert anytime there's a gun in the area because bullets kill, and they can kill very quickly, and they don't necessarily have to have a motive. They can just kill you. So, I've never dived in deeply on my personal application of the non-aggression principle, but to defend my own life, I think I'm going to have to make the decision as to what to do at the moment, and I pray that I won't ever have to make that decision. But I want to be prepared to make a decision and be in a position to make a decision which has value. I don't want to be in a helpless decision. I don't want to be in there's nothing I can do, which I could be in, but I don't want to just be like, you're big and bold and I'm defenseless.
And that was my point in bringing it up and adding the NAP is not necessarily, to critique that or whatever, but to say that there are some people, when given a set of guidelines, those guidelines become hard and fast rules for them. And I would prefer people making decisions based not on strictly training, but on what their own heart and head tells them. In this situation, like, the guy's on my property, but he's drunk and I could probably knock him out with a slap across the face, and he's, he might be tearing something up. Do I shoot him? I certainly can.
I hope you don't.
I hope I don't either. Or do I deal with him in some other way? Do I just give him an ass whooping and throw him off my property, or what do I do? Like, I think we're better. Yeah, I think we're better off when I don't have a single answer for that, because I have more choices then. And I think that training sometimes removes choices and replaces them with single answers that don't always work. Well,
with respect to police shooting, it definitely does. I mean, you can trace every one of these shootings back to that training. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what they train you to do. They train you to kill the guy.
Mm-hmm. That's why I say.
That's just like, that's insane. Mm-hmm. If you see the whole world as a collection of bad guys, and this is, I hate that language. I think we need to. I frequently try and get people to tell me, and I already told you how many bad guys that are there. There aren't very many.
No.
So there's no reason to use the vocabulary. You might as well. Why don't you talk about ghosts? Why don't the training should substitute ghosts for bad guys, because that would make more sense. Because the people when I say bad guys, then you get a mental image of a person. But that person basically doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. He's something, he exists, but it's a little bit like the whole police officer shot in the line of duty, 42, killed in a traffic accident, 52. You're not talking about the bad cars. You're assigning this ethereal blame to the bad guys is the most bizarre concept of reality. And they are trained, there's no doubt about it, they are trained to shoot first, ask questions later. And that's why they get off, too, because they're doing what they were trained to do.
Which is why I've argued recently that when an officer is charged with killing someone, they get manslaughter. Manslaughter, if you actually read about it, what's happening is not manslaughter. There is intent, there is, things.
Do you think it fits the definition of manslaughter? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think it fits manslaughter. I think it actually fits murder, because when you intentionally go and take this training, and the result of that training is that you will become more likely to kill people, and then you do kill somebody who's innocent, you had intent, you had motivation beforehand. This was planned out. You planned to take training that would make you more likely to kill somebody. And so there was no accident about it. There was.
So you're saying they are getting manslaughter charge, but they should get a murder charge? Okay, I misheard. Yeah. No, I see. I understand your logic. Yeah. Yeah. You set yourself up for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you know, and I think that we don't look at it that way a lot when it comes to police, which are other ways that we hold them to separate standards than normal people have, is we don't look at the entire history of becoming an officer and what that entails as being sort of intending to commit criminal or wrongful acts, knowing beforehand that that's often the outcome of the training, the program, that employment, etc.
Yeah, no, I think that's very very interesting way to think about it, and I had not personally thought about it that way at all. There's no doubt that many people get into police work for the wrong reasons. Mm-hmm. At the same time, as I do also believe there are a large number of really good law enforcement officers. In fact, I think they're the overwhelming majority, except, as you said, they protect their own. And that makes them bad too.
They protect their own, and the other reasons I will say is that there are no good cops at this point. And I'm not talking about the people, because I believe that, like you, I believe that those individuals, I would probably enjoy having a sit-down discussion with most of them. I probably would not mind having them as my neighbor. But as law enforcement agents, because so many of the laws are bad and wrong, agreeing to enforce that set of laws puts you in that with it. And also, the other thing is that policing as a service is forced upon you. I don't get to choose. I get it if I want a pizza. I get to choose what kind of pizza I want, and who I buy it from, and how much I'll pay, and I can pick up my coupons, and I can do all this. But with policing, with protection services, with security, I don't have any of these choices. This is being forced upon me. And not only that, it's being forced upon me and funded through the theft of my earnings by the government via taxes.
That's pretty much what's going on. You know, they steal your money and they buy something to rule your life. You know, that's exactly the situation that we're in. It's somewhat awesome that we've managed to create a system that does that to ourselves.
Yeah.
You know? I think de Tocqueville said that, though, right? I mean, he said that the problem with democracy is that citizens will learn that they can ask the government to give them things, and they will get them. Mm-hmm. And they will do that until it destroys itself. And I haven't actually read de Tocqueville, but of course that passage has been read many times to me.
Me as well. I think I heard it earlier.
And I have him on the shelf over there, and I'll tell you what, someday. Yeah, I mean, we passed these laws. But just spinning back just a little bit to what you said, it's like, yeah, they agree to enforce these laws. These are bizarre laws. I don't understand why the police themselves have not stood up and said, not on my turf. Mm-hmm. I will not do this because it's wrong. The possible explanations, okay? They honestly have not yet figured out that it's wrong. Well, there's some training, because it doesn't take much research to figure out why these laws are wrong. You don't have to get a 4-year degree to figure out why these laws are wrong. Why aren't they being taught as wrong in every criminal justice program at the universities and at the community colleges? What, are we actually teaching people that the drug laws should be enforced? Well, who is doing that? Because there's no science behind it. The Economist one time, and I keep meaning to look this up. I got to remember to look it up. But a few years ago, apparently it didn't work for them, so they quit. But they had debates, and the way it worked was they got two people that took each side of a question, and the first guy wrote something, and the second guy wrote something, and then they published it, and they got to read each other's stuff, and we got to read it, and we got to vote. But you could change your vote, okay? So you got to vote on who you agreed with, and who presented the strongest case. And then they both wrote rebuttals to the other guy, right? And they published that, and you still got to vote, but you still got to change your vote. And, you know, they were interesting debates. It was the Economist magazine. Except for the drug war debate, they couldn't even find somebody that could make a decent argument. I mean, I could have made a better argument myself and believed more of it than I believed. It was horrible. And they did have a good guy making the anti-drug war argument. Okay, that's a guy I know that he's really good. Okay, but they couldn't apparently find somebody who was even capable of making an intellectual argument, and he didn't, and it was 90 to 10. I mean, that's a loss, okay? If you can't have an honest debate with the smart guys that results in something better than 90 against the drug war and 10% for the drug war, how much more evidence do you need? I mean, if it would have been 60-40, you could still argue. But it's 90-10. The 10% is like the guy I was telling you about who's truly evil. He won't give up. You know? It's like, no, I don't care. I don't even need to talk. I'm just against it. Well, that's the only argument there is. There is no intellectually honest argument in favor of the drug war. So why are the universities not teaching that? And then the officers go and they don't get it. Okay, so that's reason number one why they believe it. They truly haven't been educated yet. Well, then number two is there's always the possibility that they really aren't able to understand the arguments. Okay, that's like they're in the cognitively challenged. Right? They aren't very smart. One of my commercials says that. That's who I know that supports it. And then another reason is I'm immoral. I'm just a hypocrite, and I don't care. I get what I want, right? Which might be good, but I'm immoral. I will go against what I know to be true for self-gain. I think that's immoral.
I'd like to think that there's a fourth issue here too, and that is that officers have been told through their training that they don't have a choice in the arrests they make, when they very much do. I mean, even according to several court cases that have been won in precedents, every officer has, before enforcing any single law, making arrests, writing a ticket, is able to make a determination on whether what they're doing actually benefits their community or if it's just compulsive, and they don't have to choose the compulsive route.
I don't know for a fact, because that it was just beginning to sort of become part of the lexicon when I started. So I don't really know what they do train on that right now. But there was always that issue of should you write every ticket, right? And they said, well, you should set your speed gun at 65 in a 55 zone, and if it buzzes, you should give a ticket. You should know before you get to the car whether you're going to give a ticket. All that is part of that managerial thing, which was intended to weed out corruption. I don't think that everybody wrote every ticket. I'm pretty sure they didn't. Because there's just some people that you weren't going to write a ticket to. You certainly weren't going to write one to your dad, but you recognized his car. But you probably weren't going to write one to your high school principal. Because you know what? He was a nice guy. And I'm not going to write him a ticket. So there's that whole thing, make up your mind beforehand and enforce the law, but then you're asking officers not to use their judgment. Now, how do you get the balance between don't be corrupt and and use your judgment, but don't be corrupt? I think some of it is teams. Two people are less likely to be corrupt than one, because it's a little bit harder. It's rotating teams, and it's teams that are bigger than two. And it's that whole community policing thing where my pride comes from I am protecting and serving my 500. And that's a prideful thing. And I don't want to fail. And failure is that I didn't protect them. It's not, one of the things, of course, that you have to protect them from is themselves. Their own lack of good judgment. So when they do get drunk, and they do get into that car, you need to go and flag them down and stop them and pull them over and give them one hell of a good lecture and maybe take their car away from them for a week, but make sure they get a ride to work, right? Mm-hmm. And let them know that it's totally unacceptable, and make sure that if you can't do it, okay? Verboten. That's protecting them. It's not arresting them. And it's protecting the rest of the world too, because drunk driving, that's another reason I want auto cars, right? Self-driving cars. That's the end. There will never be another OWI because the engine can't get drunk. But protecting your 500 means frequently protecting them from themselves. It doesn't mean arresting them because they're smoking pot. But it does mean things along the lines of, you've got a habit, and you're really into it, right? I mean, you're spending a lot of time unconscious. and I am going to take you in, but I'm not taking you into the jail. I'm taking you into the treatment house. And if you don't want to stay there, that's fine. But you're going to walk away from there. You're not going to not go there. You know, that is protecting people from themselves, and that's paternalistic. And in a real world, I'd love to never have any paternalistic activity. But if your job in this society is to protect and serve, you serve and protect that whole group of people, sometimes from themselves. But you don't arrest and incarcerate, except as a very, very last resort. You know, that's total failure.
And I think what I would call what you're talking about is, I wouldn't call it protection, because once again it does get into the sounding patronizing and stuff. I would call it assistance, because you're not looking. You know, an officer today will, if they pull you over and you're drunk, you know, they're going to tell you that you're going to jail, and the person's going to say, well, you know, I'm going to lose my job and everything, and the cop says, I don't care, you shouldn't have done that.
Right.
And what you're talking about doing is a situation where everyone wins, where you teach the person a lesson, but you also assist them so that the consequences from this don't create a worse situation than there was to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, but see, the drunk driving is almost always, not always, it's a victimless crime. You didn't hit anybody, you didn't kill anybody, it's a victimless crime. There are a lot of things that fall in that category. The obviously obnoxious ones are seatbelt laws. Texting while driving. You know, texting while driving might be a really bad idea. In which case, most of us should learn that and figure it out and not do it. And some of us won't learn that, and we will do it. But they still haven't committed a crime. You can't have a crime that there isn't a victim. That's just fundamental. And passing laws that who do you think is going to follow the no texting while driving law? The person who's going to follow it is the guy who would follow it if it wasn't a law, and the person who's going to not follow it is the guy who was going to text even if there is a law. Yeah. So what have you solved? I'll tell you what you've solved. You've just given police something to do other than protect and serve. You've given them like, now they have to drive around looking to see who's texting. Is that a safe thing for a police officer to be doing? And trying to see whether your seatbelt is fastened?
50% of cops I drive by are texting in Iowa City. So,
no, that's just the thing. Is if you have a victimless crime like that is good intentions, okay, let's honor the intentions. But let's not fail to look at the results and to think through the logic of it and to say, oh, that's probably a bad law. And let's get rid of it. Honestly, if you wanted to start getting rid of laws, I'd just go wholesale. I would say we're going to start this way. We're going to tear the law book in half, and we're going to get rid of this half. And if there's something there that you like, bring it up. We'll talk about it. But that's this year's activity. Bingo. If there's something that's worthwhile, it's going to be gone on December 31st unless you pass a law to replace it. That's how I'm seeing the whole thing is. Everybody wants to make rules to correct what the last rule that didn't work. You know, they're always making it better. They're going to improve. Well, I have a simple rule. Every law should be so crystal clear and written in such a communicative way that 80% of all the people in the country eagerly read the new law when it comes out. Because it's going to be good. It's going to actually make things better. I mean, they're going to read every word. If 80% of the people are not reading the new law, I wonder what percentage of people read the Declaration of Independence. Maybe it probably wasn't 80%, was it? Oh,
I'm sure that it's more even now, even though the numbers are low as compared to then, because even at that time, most people were still loyalists and at the time that was written, so.
Well, how about the Constitution? Do you think most people read the Constitution when it was published, or do you think just the lawmakers did?
I think it was probably mostly the lawmakers.
But they printed it in the newspapers. They used to print Lincoln's whole speech in the newspaper, and Douglas's whole speech.
At that time, you have to consider the literacy rates were much lower, so that's going to automatically take out a large portion of the population who were able to read it. At least at that time, it wasn't.
Yeah, but the literacy rates in some states, even like in Massachusetts, they had 100% literacy in the early 1800s. Like, who's that famous educator, Horace Mann. Yeah.
Horace Mann.
The first Secretary of Education in America was Secretary of Education of Massachusetts. He bragged that every child was being educated to the maximum of their ability to learn. So that must mean pretty high literacy, right?
Yeah, there were areas of high literacy during that time.
Massachusetts was probably one of the higher.
I mean,
Abraham Lincoln didn't have, like, you know, a teacher, I guess, right? He had to teach himself to read, I don't know.
you get south of the border, though, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's actually, I'd like to probably around tape, so wrap this up, and then we can
sure,
talk if you want to,
Yeah,
but
sure,
just
yeah.
so that I have a clear end date.
Yeah. Okay, let's wrap it up.
All right, so
First, no, before you start, let me say something. You know, I didn't know you before you came over here tonight. Heard about you wrote me earlier this week, and actually I did get you mixed up with somebody else, and I answered them. It's like a reform group or something. And then you wrote back a second time, and I'm like, oh, I thought it wasn't quite right, but I didn't mean to not answer the first time. I briefly looked. I'd seen your site somehow or another before, and just I knew it. I think probably the logo I knew. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I looked at it briefly. But you came over tonight, and absolutely, it's been one of the better conversations I've had in the last few years. It's been absolutely wonderful, and I'm very grateful that you got a hold of me and that we were able to talk. Because, you know, I like to learn. I think I'm smart, and I know I don't know very much. I am continually impressed and awed and grateful for the people who teach me things that I don't know, and so I'm really nice that you came over. No, I'm very appreciative.
I absolutely feel the same way. A friend of mine, Jordan Farley, who he's a big fan of yours, he introduced me to you.
Oh, it was Jordan. Yeah.
And he said, you know, you have to get a hold of this guy and talk to him, and I did, and I.
Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. And when I watched the video, I didn't take any more convincing than I was like, yeah. And this has been great talking with you. I've talked with some other people before who had discussed trying to get inside the system and change it. But nobody really has had a realistic plan for how to do that, because they want to cross over into the lawmaker or whatever, which you can't do. And I think that your plan to use, you know, your humanity and your reason and to become a leader to the other officers is exactly what is needed. And I am for abolishing police. What we talked about earlier with you rebranding police, I think is essentially the same thing. Is we're getting rid of what we think of policing now, and finding the services that communities still need, and figuring out how that we can you know, provide those services based on the community's needs, desires, and all of those things. So I'm certainly going to be promoting you as candidate and trying to get the word out as far and wide. And on top of that, I would just like to thank you for all of the really hard work you've put into this, all the effort, all the money and time and resources spent trying to do this, because it's obviously not a selfish thing. It's something that you're giving back to, you know, other human beings. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, too.
Thanks, sir.
It's been a pleasure.
You too. Thank you. Turn these off here real quick.